Hi, welcome back to Fantasy Ball Profits. My name is Rob Skudovic. Thanks for joining me tonight. Tonight I'm going to be doing the Week 9 Start-Sit video. And we're going to give you just some pieces of information, food for thought, things you may want to consider when you're looking at who you're going to start and who you're going to sit and whatnot. But before I get into it, I've been really look back at each week. I try to do the best I can to give you guys good advice. We try to take into account matchups. We look at statistics, trends, latest news coming out of the different camps to really help you guys break down who you should start and sit. But the one thing that I realize that even the best prognosticators out there are going to be wrong at times. It's easy to look back in retrospect and think about who you should start it. But the one thing is, even if you make good decisions, there's an element of luck prepared in this. But I will say this, even though there's an element of luck in fantasy football, luck favors the well-prepared, and so be really careful to stay away from emotion and hunches. Stay the course, play solid information. If you do that 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be in the right. You're going to make the playoffs and going to go far in the playoffs. Once again, stick to the information. The other thing I want to say before we get into the games, you need to contextualize this. When I look, obviously I don't know your team. I don't know your league. I don't know your scoring rules. I don't know your bench depth. I don't know your waiver wire. So you got to take this information. You got to put in the context of your team and in your league. Now I want to get into the first game this week. Buffalo Bills at the Jets. So let's look at the quarterbacks first. Well, let's look at Tyrod Taylor. Now, the Jets gave up the 11th most points to quarterbacks, and when he faced them earlier this year, he scored 18.76 points. A pretty good day. Now, he's what I would call a mid-range start this week. Now, the one concern I have for Tyrod Taylor, he doesn't have a lot of wideouts. His best wideout at this point has been Holmes. They did trade for Calvin Benjamin, but I do have some concerns going into this week. Is Calvin going to be able to get there? It's Tuesday today, so get there in time to learn the playbook, get his timing down with Tyrod Taylor, and only have 2 days to do it on a Thursday night game? Probably not. Obviously, Calvin's going to see the field. How actually involved he gets, we don't know at this point. And the other thing that concerns me too, why I keep his ceiling low, Tyrod Taylor, is that they like to run the ball and play defense. I think that's the MO for the Bills. Let's look at Josh McCown. So is he a guy that you could start this week? Well, they're playing Buffalo. Buffalo gives with the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, week 1, when Josh faced them, he threw 2 picks with no TDs. Now, since then, he's been much improved. In fact, in the last 4 games, he's thrown 9 TD passes and only 4 interceptions. Although those numbers look good, but they also came against what we call passer-friendly matchups. Now he's going against a tougher defense. Now, the last of the time he faced a tough defense was the Jaguars, and he really struggled in that game too. Now, you look at Buffalo, they're off to a surprising start, 5-2. They're playoff contention. They're playing good ball right now. And last week, Carr also struggled against them to throw the ball. So even though the last 3 quarterbacks that have faced the Bills have thrown over 300 yards a game, you look at their cumulative totals, they've had 5 in 3 games. They've had 5 TD passes to 5 interceptions. That's not great. So to sum it all up, here's what I'd say about Josh. He's really in the bottom 3rd of quarterbacks. You can play him if you need to. If you're desperate, he's not a great option out there for you. Let's take a look at running backs. This is LaShawn McCoy. LaShawn McCoy is a must-start every week. Now, he's going against the Jets, who get the 10th most points to running backs, but it wouldn't matter if they were the toughest against running backs. You're going to start McCoy simply because do you honestly have a 3rd running back on your bench that's better than McCoy? You obviously don't. Okay, so you're going to start this guy regardless. He's looking good last 2 weeks. He's had big weeks. Now, there's a lot of reasons when we look at Jets running backs. Well, I would want to avoid all the running backs. One, they're playing Buffalo, who gives up the 10th fewest points to running backs. But here's the thing. Forte was limited in practice today. He's been a little banged up. And they've been really ineffective. Last game, Powell was their leading rusher. He had 14 carries for 33 yards and 2.4 yards per carry. So they haven't run the ball very well. They share the carries. They split it up. And so it doesn't give anybody a lot of value at this point. It's just a scary situation out there. Now, I will say this. If you are desperate, Forte and Powell might have value for you in PPR leagues. The one thing the Jets like to do is they like to use their running backs in the passing game. In fact, last game, Forte had 6 catches for 45 yards and Powell had 3 for 28. So if you're really desperate, you could consider using them in PPR leagues. I would not even consider using them in a standard league. There are better options out there. Take a look at wideouts in this game. Well, none of the Bills' wideouts are good. Once again, Holmes is their best so far. He's got 3 TDs. He's had increased playing time. Look at Jordan Matthews on paper is the #1 wideout, but he hasn't been good at all. In fact, in the last 3 games, he's had a total of 5 catches for 31 yards combined. Now, today they didn't make a huge move for Calvin Benjamin, but like I said earlier, I think he's going to be good down the road. I think he's going to maintain his value playing for Buffalo as he did when he was in Carolina. But I'm going to caution you this week. He doesn't have a lot of time to get there, learn the playing book, get his timing down. So I don't think he's somebody that would be comfortable trusting in Calvin this week. So now let's look at Jets wideouts. Should you start Jets wideouts? Well, Buffalo gives up the 11th most points to wideouts. Now, when you take a look at the Jets wideouts, well, one, the Jets like to use their tight ends and running backs in the passing game a lot, and that lowers the wideout value. Curley's suspended today, so he's a non-option. Curse has 4 TDs on the year, but he's had a decreased role week to week. The one guy out there that you may want to roll with that's decent right now is Robbie Anderson. He has TDs 2 weeks in a row. The 6'3" receiver, a 2nd-year wideout. He really has the most upside, and he's a guy right now that's playing better each week. I like the guy. I think he sits at about a wide out 4 or 5 option for you if you need to. As far as tight ends go, start Austin Jenkins. He looks good. Plays Buffalo, gives up the 7th most points to tight ends. Clay is doubtful, so you have O'Leary for Buffalo. 2 out of the last 3 games he's been solid, and the Jets allowed 8th most points to tight ends. He's not a bad start. He's not a great start. He sits about the 12 to 15 range in terms of the tight end ranking this week. As far as kickers go, I would start Catanzaro, but I'd also start Steven Hauschka. Even though the Jets allow the least amount of points to kickers, that was mostly a product of the Jets playing bad offense. So both those kickers I would start. As far as defenses go, I would start the Bills. And the Jets are playing Buffalo. But if you look at it right now, the Bills, they really play a conservative offense, so they don't allow a lot of turnovers or sacks. In fact, the Bills allow the 6th fewest points to defenses. So I would start Buffalo. I'd sit the Jets. Let's look at our next game here. Baltimore and Tennessee. Well, let's look at the quarterbacks there. Well, Joe Flacco is playing Tennessee, who gives up the 13th most points to quarterbacks. Flacco's been a mess this year. He missed a preseason because of an injury, and ever since then he has just struggled. He's not a great quarterback, even if you look at his entire career. I know he's had some postseason success. His career quarterback rating is 83.9, and he's had 2 decent seasons in terms of fantasy football. But other than that, he really hasn't been a great quarterback. Now, the last 2 games, he's thrown for 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions, so it looks like progress. But he's only averaged 143 yards passing, and on the year he's got 6 TDs to 8 interceptions. He's been far from spectacular. I would veer away from him if you can. Flacco's not a guy that I'd want to look at. Let's look at Marcus Mariota. A couple things are going well for him this week. One, he gets Corey Davis back. That's going to help him a lot. 1st round pick, I think 5th overall. Is going to be back from a back injury. Now, he is playing Baltimore. Now, that's a downside. Baltimore gives up the 2nd fewest points to quarterbacks. But if you look at their stats, once again, they've shut down a lot of QBs. They give up the 2nd fewest points to quarterbacks, but they faced Cleveland's Kaiser, Trubinsky, Moore, E.J. Manuel, and Case Keenum. So those aren't great quarterbacks. So I think those stats have been kind of inflated a little bit. I think they're beatable. I think that he can have a decent game against them. In fact, that was evident this year when Blake Bortles lit him up for 4 TD passes. So you could start Marcus Mariota against him, and I think feel pretty comfortable this week. How about the running backs? Well, Alec Collins is a guy that we have talked about for weeks on the waiver wire, some other things. He's looked great all year. We've kind of wondered why the Ravens haven't used him more. Well, last week he breaks out. He has 18 carries, 113 yards, and on the year he has a really healthy yards per carry of 6.0. Now he plays the Titans, who are in the middle of the road in terms of points allowed to running back. So I would start Alec Collins. Javarius Allen on there is a guy that I wouldn't start in standard leagues, but in PPR leagues you could start him. He catches a lot of balls out of the backfield. They use him in the passing game a lot. The Ravens, let's look at the Ravens. The Ravens are 15th in points allowed to running backs. DeMarco Murray is questionable this week. It sounds like he sat out practice today, but all indications would seem to point at the fact that he's going to play. Now, in the last 3 games, he's had double-digit points, so even hasn't been spectacular. He's done all right points-wise, and the reason why that is he stays relevant in the passing game. He's had 11 catches over 3 games, so even though he's not getting 100 yards rushing the ball, he's getting catches. His total yards are pretty decent. So as long as he plays this week, watch the injury report on Friday, and if he's going to start, I would be comfortable starting him. Derrick Henry. Now, he's a guy coming here a lot of people were big on, and he's been hit or miss. He's had some couple big games this year. But right now, I would sit Derrick Henry until we see more. In the last 4 games, he had 1 huge game and 19 carries of 139 yards and a TD. But if you look at the other 3 games, in total, those 3 games total, he had 23 carries for 29 yards and a yards per carry of 1.23. And on the year, he's only had 4 catches all year, so he's not really involved in the passing game. He's very one-dimensional, so I would sit Henry until something changes there. He can still have a little more confidence in me. I'd sit him. As far as wideouts go, you look at Macklin. Now, Macklin sits as a board at number 3 wideout. He's battled injuries all year. He does have 4 TDs on the year. And Tennessee gives up the 12th most points allowed to wideout. So you could go with Jeremy Macklin if you wanted to. Hasn't been great, but he'd be an all-right number 3 guy. Now, Buffalo gives up the least points to wideouts. And so right away, that's a concern for Rashard Matthews. He's had 1 good game all year. Besides that, he's averaging about 7 points a game, so he hasn't been that spectacular. Now you add Davis coming back and Decker getting healthy. That really steals targets, spreads the ball around, so I think Rashard Matthews is a guy I'd stay away from. Of all those wide receivers, Davis has the most upside, but I think he may work him back slowly into the offense coming back from a back injury, so I wouldn't start Davis this week. I'd probably wait till the week after just to see how he's going to do, how much time he's going to see on the field. And once again, the Ravens have a decent pass defense there. As far as tight ends go, Delaney Walker is questionable, so watch the injury report Friday. If he plays, you got to start him. And Benjamin Watson is a very low-end start. Playing an average defense versus tight ends, and he's an okay option out there. He's not great, so you have to be kind of desperate, but you go with Benjamin Watson if you need to. As far as kickers go, you got to start Tucker. Tucker is a stud kicker. He's money. Another guy up there you got to start is Ryan Suckup. Now, when Marcus Mariota has been at quarterback, if you take away the games where he's injured, if you look at the games where Marcus has started, Ryan Suckup has been, he's led all kickers in average points per game. He's been just lights out. The offense is so much better. So start both those guys. As far as defenses go, you can start Baltimore, and I would sit Tennessee. They've only had one good game on defense, and that was against Cleveland. Need I say more? It was against Cleveland, so sit Tennessee. Saints versus the Bucks. Let's look at quarterbacks. Well, Jameis Winston. Now, strong indications are that he's going to sit this week. He's really banged up. But if he starts, I wouldn't start his backup. Ryan Fitzpatrick. If he starts, I would sit him. But if Winston plays, watch Friday. If he plays, I would start him. Now, we know that New Orleans' defense has improved. Right now, they're giving 16 most points to quarterbacks. Now, some of the improvement they've seen over the last 5 weeks, once again, their defense is doing better over the last 5 weeks. They have a 5-game winning streak. But if you look at who they played during those 5 games, their defense has improved. But in Week 4, they played Miami. Jay Cutler had a quarterback rating of 71.1. In Week 7, they played Brett Hundley, and he had a quarterback rating of 39.9. In Week 8, they played Mitch Trubisky, who had a quarterback rating of 46.9. So it's a little deceiving. Yeah, they're doing better on defense, but part of that is who they played, the quarterbacks they faced. So once again, if Jameis Winston plays, I would start him. Drew Brees playing Tampa Bay, who gives up the 6th most points to quarterbacks. He's not the Drew Brees of old. And the reason why is the defense is playing better. New Orleans is running the ball, and they're having more balanced attack. And so you need to start Drew Brees, but I don't expect him to go out for 350 yards and 4 TDs. I think things are changing there in New Orleans in terms of how they're approaching the game. As far as running backs go, Doug Martin plays New Orleans, who gives up the 11th most points to backs. He's been good except one game against Buffalo where he really struggled. Otherwise, he's the guy that you need to start. He's getting volume, and volume matters. He's going to get a majority of the carries, so you could go with Doug Martin. And then there's Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. They play Tampa Bay, who gives up the 9th most points to running backs. Sometimes that spooks me a little bit, having 2 running backs that are sharing carries and sharing looks, but I think this offense can sustain both backs, so I'd be comfortable starting either one of those, whether it's down or whether it's PPR. Another thing that may actually help Alvin this week is that there's been some fumble issues for Ingram. Ingram has looked great. He's played very effectively, but he's fumbling the ball. I think he's got 3 fumbles in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And so that could mean a greater role for the rookie. So I would start both of those running backs. I suspect that they'll be all right. As far as wideouts go, well, Tampa Bay gives up the most points to wideouts. So you got to start Michael Thompson. In fact, I'm going to say this. This is the game where Michael Thompson finally gets over 100 yards the first time this year. He's going to get a TD for you. And I would start Ted Ginn. Right now, Ted Ginn is really the number 2 guy on that team. Snead. We're not really sure what's going on there. He's been out. He was inactive. He had a suspension. Last week he played. He had no catches. So in the meantime, Ted Ginn's your number 2 guys. You got to start Mike Evans. He's a must-start, obviously, all the time. And then you look at Deshaun Jackson. Well, he's really had a quiet year. Now, this week he's kind of a wide receiver 4 in terms of the matchup that he has and where he's been. You could start him. It's not a bad start, but he's not a great start if you need a wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends out there go, Braid has been very consistent and solid all year. Now, if you look at New Orleans, they've locked down tight ends. They give up the 2nd fewest points to tight ends. But if you look at who they've shut down at tight ends, it's been below average tight ends. The one good tight end they faced was Gronkowski, and he lit them up. And so Braid's still a decent start for you. He's a safe start with a low ceiling. Howard, I won't start him. He's too inconsistent at this point to trust, so sit him. And then you need to sit Kobe Fleener. He's not good. As far as kickers go, you can start Lutz, but I would sit Patrick Murray. And as far as defenses go, I would sit Tampa Bay. You could start New Orleans. They're a decent start. They sit in kind of the 10 to 14 range as far as defenses go. Then you get the Rams and the Giants. Well, let's look at quarterbacks. Well, Jared Goff plays New York. New York gives up the 5th most points to tight ends. And then to make things better for Jared Goff this week is New York today suspended their top corner, Janoris Jenkins. They suspended him for issues. I think he was a no-show to practice or late, something like that. Whatever it is, they suspended him. That's only going to help Goff playing a team that was already struggling against the pass. I would say Eli Manning. The Rams are good against the pass. Now, Shepard will be back this week, but he's missing so many weapons. And Eli actually struggled early in the year. So when he had Odell and when he had Marshall there, before they even got hurt, they struggled. And so even though he's getting Shepard back, I don't think he's somebody that you want to start. Now, what I think the Giants are going to want to do to take pressure off of Eli and the fact the offensive line is not that good is they're going to try to run the ball, and they want to avoid a shootout. They don't want to get into a big shootout with the Rams at this point. As far as running backs go, Orleans Darkwa, you need to start him. Now, he was quiet last game, but that was the fact that they fell behind. They had to throw the ball. And the Rams give up the 2nd most points to running backs. And right now, Darkwa is averaging 5.4 yards per carry, so he's a guy that you could start there. Todd Gurley is a must start. In fact, he's averaging the most points per game of any running back out there. He's having a phenomenal year. Start Todd Gurley. As far as wideouts go, Sterling Shepard will be back. He's a very talented second-year wideout, and he's a guy you need to start because really he's the only wideout that Eli has. So he's going to get a lot of targets. I don't think that he's going to get a lot of yards. I think you could see him with 7-8 catches for 70 or 80 yards. So he's not going to have a lot of yards per catch, but a lot of volume there. I would sit all other New York wideouts. Now, as far as the Rams wideouts go, New York. They allow the 15th fewest points to wideouts. Now, Jenkins is out once again, so that's going to help the Rams wideouts. I would sit Watkins at this point, Sammy Watkins. Now, this is a hard one because he has so much talent. He's a guy that you could sit and he could blow up and get up with 150 yards. But if you took a look at him this year, he's had one good game. In the last 4 games, he's averaged 3.75 targets. So there's something about Sammy Watkins. Now, maybe Buffalo saw something that we didn't see, and that's why they traded him. But since he's been there for the Rams, he hasn't been that great. Of all the wideouts there, the most consistent has been Wood. And so I would start Wood. He's averaging double-digit points 4 of the last 5 games he's played, so that's the guy you want to go with, Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp, love the guy. He's had higher targets. He's got 3 TDs on the year, but he's had lower yardage totals and catches, so I'd shy away from him until there's some more consistency. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Evan Ingram. This guy is phenomenal. Now, he's got a tough matchup against the Rams, who are really tight against tight ends, but he's got Gronk-like talent. This guy is the real deal. They talked about him all preseason, how athletic, how amazing he was. He's getting better and better. Evan Ingram is a top 10 tight end from this point forward. And then you look at the tight ends for the Rams, Higbee, Everett. Together, they have a total of 21 catches for the year. That's 3 catches a game between the both of them. That's not good. Stay away from both of those guys. As far as kickers go, Greg Zuerlein, I would start him. I would sit Rosas, the kicker for the Giants. Defense to start the Rams. Sit the New York Giants. They've had one good game this year. It was against Denver, so go ahead and sit them. The Eagles against the Broncos. Well, as far as quarterbacks go, Carson Wentz, this kid is good. You got to love him. He's so talented. In the last 3 games, he's got 13 TDs, only 3 interceptions. And last game, he only had 2 touchdown passes. And the reason why is they didn't need to throw in the second half. So once again, he's tearing up last 3 games, 13 touchdown passes, only 3 picks. This kid's the real deal. You got to start him. It doesn't matter who he's playing right now. You got to sit Trevor Siemian. He's been horrible. It's time for Denver to look at a quarterback change there. He's getting worse and worse. In fact, since week 2, if you look at week 3 on, he's got 3 TD passes to 8 picks. He's been brutal. So sit Trevor. He's not an option for you out there. So as running backs go, Philadelphia gives up the 7th fewest points to running backs. But I would start C.J. Anderson, and here's why. He's going to get the carries, and there's not a lot of good options out there at running back. I think most of you out there, some of you had 2 good backs, but a lot of people I know are struggling. They're searching the waiver wire, trying to find that good option. At least C.J. Anderson's going to get the ball. Once again, they're going to want to run it, take pressure off the quarterback, and do some of these things. I would start C.J., but I would lower your expectation. Now, there's a couple other reasons why I think he's still a decent starter. He's averaging 4.4 yards per carry, and they use him a lot in the passing game. So even if they fall behind, even if they're struggling, he still have relevance there. Another guy that you may look at, now this is a stretch. This is kind of a deep sleeper out there. If you're really desperate, is Booker, the running back for the Broncos. If you're desperate, you could start him in a PPR league. He's had 10 catches the last 3 games, and then the last game he added 9 carries for 40 yards and a TD, I should say. I would assume that Denver's going to be playing from behind in this game and therefore need to throw the ball a lot, so that maybe would put Booker on your radar. Now, here's something that surprised me today. The Philadelphia Eagles traded for J.I.J., the running back for Miami Dolphins. So is he going to have a big week? I don't know what to think about this. I've got J.I.J. in one of my keeper leagues. I love that he's going to a better offense. It's going to open things up. They can't just focus and load the box up and shut him down. One thing that concerns me is LeGarrette Blount was running the ball all right. I think LeGarrette Blount, was averaging 4.7 yards per carry. And so it's not like he's not going to get carries. So right now, J.I.J. is not going to get 25, 30 carries a game. I think you're going to see him closer to 15 to 20. And then the first week back, I wonder, can he get there quick enough and learn the system, learn the playbook? One of the reasons why they say they trade him away is he struggled with pass coverage for Miami, and their coach Gase was really frustrated with him and fed up. And so if he's already struggling to understand pass protection there, can we really expect him to get there quick enough to learn pass protection in an offense that throws the ball a lot and they want to protect their young quarterback? So I'm going to lower my expectations for J.I.J. this week for a lot of reasons. It would be hard for me not to start him, but I would say start him, and don't be surprised if he only gets maybe 10 to 12 carries this week. Look at the wideouts. Philadelphia gives up the most points, or the 10th most points to wideouts. I'd start Demaryius Thomas, and Emmanuel Sanders is due back this week, so I would start them. Now, last week we said that you should sit Jeffrey. And the reason why we said they got 3 guys there, they spread the ball around a lot, and Jeffrey's been inconsistent. So he goes out, he has 62 yards and a TD. So we were wrong about that prediction. I don't know. I would say that even though he had 1 catch, if you look at that 1 catch, he made a nice play, broke a tackle, ran it in, but he only had 2 catches on the day. So even though he had a decent day in terms of fantasy points, there's just a lot of red flags out there and why he's not getting more targets, more catches, those sort of things. So he's a guy that right now Denver allows the 5th fewest points to wideouts. So I would sit Jeffrey. I know it's tough. I know he's got talent, but I would sit him. Now Aguilar has 5 TDs on the year, but he has a tough matchup. So Aguilar sits at about a wide receiver 3 or 4. I would lean towards sitting him. As far as tight ends go, you're going to go with Zach Ertz. He had another TD last week, and he plays Denver, who gives up decent amount of points at tight end position. You got to start him and sit all Denver tight ends. As far as kicker goes, start Jake Elliott. This guy has been a revelation. Sit Brandon McManus. As far as defenses go, I would sit Denver. Now, I know they're a really good defense, but there's been a major drop-off in their production. A lot of it is the fact that their offense can't put points on the board. They're falling behind, so that defense, they can't pin their ears back and put pressure on the quarterback. And so I would actually sit Denver against Wentz, and I would start Philly's defense. Falcons versus the Panthers. Well, let's look at the quarterbacks here. We got Cam Newton. Now, Cam came back down to earth last 2 games, but he's still worthy of a start at quarterback. He's still got enough talent out there, and he's still decent. It's hard to sit him at this point. Matt Ryan. Now, I want to say this. A lot of people are shocked at Matt Ryan, but if you look at our preseason predictions, if you look at our website, we said we felt like last year was an anomaly. He was going to come down. We gave a number of reasons why, his quarterback rating, some other stats that pointed to the fact that he wasn't going to have a great year. And so I'm kind of proud of the fact that we predicted the fact that he is struggling. Don't expect him to return to an MVP form. He's just not going to do that. Now he faces the Panthers, who give up the 6th fewest points to quarterbacks. And so here's what I would expect for Ryan this game. You're probably going to have to start him, right? Okay, unless you've got somebody that's maybe top 5 or 6. Ryan's a guy you're going to have to start. I would expect, again, maybe 225 yards, 1 or 2 TDs. It's not going to be great, but it would be a decent start. I can start him. As far as the running backs go, you've got Freeman. Now, Freeman has a hurt shoulder. He's expected to play, and if he's out there on the field, you got to start him. Another guy you look at is Coleman. Now, Carolina is a good defense against the run. Coleman's a second back, and you never know. He's very talented. He's a guy that if Freeman were to sit, he would become a top 10 running back immediately. In the meantime, though, if Freeman does play, knowing he's going against Carolina, who's good against the run, I would probably sit Coleman. Now, Atlanta gives up the 6th most points to backs. So Atlanta's given up a lot of points to running backs. I would start Stewart, but do it kind of with the idea of like a 2 or 3 on the bubble there. Now, last week he had a great matchup, and he had a TD, but he had only 11 carries for 34 yards, so he wasn't spectacular. He did salvage his day with a touchdown there. But going against Atlanta, he's a guy that you could start, but I would keep your expectations lower. Start McCaffrey. Now, McCaffrey is a guy that I would start only in a PPR league. He's essentially a wideout. That's what he is. Less and less carries. He hasn't been very effective carrying the ball, and so I would start him in PPR league. As far as the wideouts go, you start Funchess. Now he's the number 1 guy there. Since they traded Calvin Benjamin, he becomes the guy, so you got to start him. He's a huge pickup for a lot of them. It's a no-brainer to start Julio Jones. Now you look at Sanu. Sanu the last 2 games has been good, but he did that against very favorable matchups. And this week I would sit him against a tough Panthers defense. As far as tight ends go, I would sit Hooper. Carolina's linebackers, they shut down tight ends. They really do. Now, Hooper's had 4 good games, but the other 3 games he's had a combined 4 catches for 21 yards, and now he faces a tough Carolina defense. They don't allow a lot of points to tight ends. I would sit Ed Dixon. I would start both kickers in this game. And as far as defenses go, I would really sit both defense. Now, the Panthers actually have a really good defense in football terms, but if you look at their numbers in terms of fantasy football, they don't put out a lot of points. They've really struggled against veteran quarterbacks in terms of fantasy football numbers go. So just because a good defense in the NFL doesn't necessarily make them a good fantasy defense. In this case, that's where Carolina is. I would sit both defenses. The Bengals versus the Jaguars. Let's look at the quarterbacks. Well, I would sit Dalton. Jacksonville gives up the least points to quarterbacks. In fact, right now the Jags are on pace to break Bears' 1985 sack record of 72 sacks. They're on pace to have 75. And then this last week they added off a defensive lineman from the Bills, Darius, who was really good. In fact, back in 2014 he had 10 sacks. So they just got better. That's possible. And now they're going to play Dalton. So Dalton is a guy that I would stay away from against Jacksonville. Jacksonville's defense is phenomenal, so stay away from Dalton. I would sit Blake Bortles. Blake plays Cincinnati, who gives up the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks. So I expect this game to be a low-scoring defensive battle. I think the Jags are going to win it, but it's not going to be pretty. Both teams, I think, are going to try to run the ball, especially if you're Jacksonville. As far as running backs go, I would start Leonard Fournette. He's back this week, healthy, had a bye week to rest up, and he's your guy. You got to roll with him. I won't sit the other two backs. Ivory Yeldon only have value if he's out, and he should be 100% ready to go. I would start mixing. The Jags give up the 15 most points to running backs. Last game, he had a nice game. He didn't do great running the ball, but he had 3 catches for 91 yards. And if you look at him this year, he's actually been pretty solid in the passing game. Mixon has He's had 17 targets for 17 catches, so he's been perfect in converting his catches there. So he's pretty involved in the passing game. I would start Mixon. I would sit all others. As far as wideout goes, you got to start A.J. Green. Now, it's going to be a tough day for him. So A.J. Green is a solid, phenomenal wide receiver. Normally, he's a wide receiver 1, but because of who he's playing, he falls in the wide receiver 2 category. The Jags give up the second least points to wideouts. Cincinnati gives up the 4th fewest points to wideouts, so I would sit Hearns and Lee. If you really need to start somebody there, you could go with Lee, but I would probably sit both those guys. As far as tight ends go, I would sit the tight end for the Jags. And if you look at tight end Croft, he's a moderate play against the Jags, who are kind of middle of the road in terms of points allowed to tight ends. Now, the reason why I think that Croft might be a decent start in this game, one of the things I think is going to happen is Jaguars will put a lot of pressure on Andy Dalton and the Bengals, and I expect that Andy's going to use his tight end as kind of a safe check down guy, so I won't be surprised if Croft gets 5 or 6 catches for maybe 50 or 60 yards. Not going to have a great game, but he'll have a decent game if you're desperate for somebody. I would sit both kickers, and I would start both defenses in this game. So let's look at the Colts and the Texans. Well, I would start Watson. Now, last week we talked about sitting Watson. Here's why. I like Watson. I'm on my keeper leg. I think this guy's going to be phenomenal. The one concern I had, and I think a lot of people did, is they were going into Seattle. It was the first tough defense he played. He had a lot of huge numbers, but he put it up against really bad pass defenses. Now, if you look at rookie quarterbacks that had been in Seattle last time, the last 7 are 1-6 versus them. They've been really shutting down rookie quarterbacks, so he said you may want to look elsewhere. Well, you know what? This kid is the real deal. He came out, in fact, he shattered a record for most touchdown passes the first 7 games of his career. And he's in the conversation, not just for Rookie of the Year, but the guy's in the conversation right now for MVP. He's been phenomenal. You got to start Watson. This guy is something else. You could look at starting Jacoby Brissett if you need to. If your quarterback's on a bye or if he's hurt, Jacoby Brissett is a guy that you could start, or if you're in a league that starts 2 quarterbacks, you could go there. Houston gives up the 2nd most points to quarterbacks, and they're really missing Watt, some other guys on defense. They're just not the same tenacity. They're not getting after the passer, and so they're all right. And here's another reason why I think that Jacoby would be a decent start this week is that I believe they're going to be playing from behind, which means they're going to have to throw the ball a lot, and there's going to be a lot of garbage time stats. Now, the one concern you may have is if you're in a league that minuses for interceptions, that might be something that's going to would make me hesitate starting them. But if you're in a league that doesn't penalize you for interceptions, go ahead and start him. You get a lot of garbage time stats for you. As far as running backs go, Indianapolis gives up the 3rd most points to running backs. Also, the Texans actually demoted Foreman, so that's a huge bump in Lamar Miller. You got to start him. He's going to be a good start this week. Now, Houston is stingy against the run. They give the 2nd fewest points to running backs. I would sit Gore. Now, you may want to consider starting Marlon Mack. And the reason why is he had double-digit points 3 of the last 4 games, and they're going to be playing from behind, throwing the ball a lot, and he's been seeing an increased role in the passing game. He's a guy who's kind of flashy out there. He's showing some signs there that he could really have a huge impact in their passing game. As far as wideouts go, I got to start Fuller. Guy's crazy. 7 TDs in 5 games. It's insane. Obviously, he's not going to keep that up. He's not going to keep scoring touchdowns at that rate. There's no reason to believe that this guy is not a solid guy. Remember, he's a former first-round pick who started really well last year in the first 4 games for Houston last year with Brock Osweiler, a quarterback who's not very good. He had 2 100-yard games, and he had 2 touchdowns. So he showed these signs last year. So it's not a fluke that he's doing this. He's very solid. Another guy, he started Hopkins. This guy's a stud. Now that he has a good QB, we can see what he did a couple years ago when he had 1,600 yards. Now, Houston gives up the 7th most points to wideouts. So Houston's vulnerable against wideouts. It's really hard for me to say this, but I think at this point, if you have T.Y. Hilton, you got to sit him. And I have T.Y. Hilton in the league, and I'm going to sit him. Or if you do play him, you need to play him as a wide receiver 3 and keep very low expectation. He's been struggling. In fact, he's had 5 catches in 5 games. It's gotten really ugly there for him. They can't get the ball downfield. They've had a ton of issues. So T.Y. Hilton is somebody that I would probably sit. As far as the other wideouts go, they spread the ball around. There's not really any one guy that really strikes me as a guy that you'd be comfortable starting there. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Jack Doyle. Last week he had a career game, 12 catches, over 100 yards, and a TD. Jacoby loves to use him a lot in that game, and so he's a great tight end there. I would sit all of Texas tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would start Fairbairn and Vinatieri are both kickers I would start in this game. As far as defense, I would sit Indy. I would start Houston. Now, Houston's not a great start. They're not as good as they once were, but they're a decent start at defense. The Cardinals versus the 49ers. Sit Stanton. I know he's playing San Francisco, and San Francisco's bad against the pass, but Stanton is a career journeyman. There's nothing there that I like about this guy. There's nothing that makes me think he's going to have a good game. And Garoppolo got traded to San Francisco. That's another big thing that happened today is Jimmy Garoppolo got traded to the 49ers, but I don't think he's going to be ready this week. He's got to come there. He's got to learn the offense. That's especially hard for a quarterback. So we're going to see one more week of Beathard, and you know what? Sit the guy. He hasn't been good. There's a reason why they traded for Jimmy, so I wouldn't start either quarterback in this game. As far as running backs go, start Peterson. Adrian Peterson. San Francisco gives up the most points to running backs, so they're going to want to run the ball a lot. One, to take pressure off the quarterback. Go ahead. Now, Arizona is tough against the run. They actually allow the 8th fewest points to running backs. So should you start a running back? Well, I would start Carlos Hyde. Why? Running backs are hard to find, and so if somebody's going to get the ball there, and I think he's going to get the ball a lot. I would sit Bright at this point. As far as wideouts go, I would sit Garcon. Now, this is weird because if you look at Arizona, they actually give up a decent amount of points to wide receivers. But if you look at Garcon specifically, here's why I would start him this week. 1, he's questionable. He's banged up. 2, Patrick Peterson, he'll be lined up against. And 3, Beathard is just not very good. And so Garcon falls into a wide receiver 3 or 4 category this week. As far as Goodwin goes, he's a guy that might be a decent option. Once again, Arizona gives up the 4th most points to wideouts. But the quarterback issues and the unpredictability leaves too much in question there. If you look at Goodwin, he's a former track star who can get you 4 catches for 100 yards, and then he'll disappear for a couple weeks. He's very hit or miss. I would start Larry Fitzgerald. The guy's an ageless wonder. He was having a great year. It's really sad that Palmer got hurt because he was having such a good year, and that obviously hurts his value a lot, but he's just too good to sit. So Larry Fitzgerald is the guy that I would start. Then you look at John Brown, Jaron Brown, and J.J. Nelson, the other 3 wideouts for the Cardinals. 1, they spread the ball around too much from week to week. You just don't know who's going to get the majority of the targets there. And then you look back at the quarterback situation, makes the rest of those guys I would sit. As far as tight ends go, I would sit Kittle, at least till Jimmy takes over. Once Garoppolo takes over at quarterback, I think George Kittle has great value at tight end. I would sit the Cards tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would sit Dawson. He was good with Palmer. He was having a good year, but I just don't expect that's going to happen. Now, if you really had to, I suppose you could start him as a kicker. He falls in that range, about 15 to 18 in that range. I would sit Gould. I would start Arizona's defense this week, but I would sit San Francisco. The Redskins versus the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle was great against the pass, right, until they faced Watson last week. Ouch. But they're still good. Seattle's still got a good defense. They're still going to be good against the pass. And so Cousins is not a top 10 quarterback this week. He's a mid-range start, but lower your expectations going against Seattle. Russell Wilson is a must-start. They have no running game at all. They can't go anywhere. It's been brutal. I think Eddie Lacy had 6 carries for 0 yards. Rawls, they're constantly getting dropped in the backfield for 2 or 3 yard losses. They look terrible. Now, they did get offensive lineman Brown. They traded from him from the Texans. That's going to help a little bit shore up, I think, their pass protection. I don't think it's going to help the running game enough to suddenly make them run the ball well. Russell Wilson is really – that team is going to win or lose based on how much he throws the ball. And so the guy's been chucking out there. He looks great. You got to start Russell Wilson. As far as running backs go, sit all Seattle running backs. I would start Chris Thompson in Washington. He's really having a great year. For a while, he was considered a guy that you could start in PPR leagues, but I actually consider starting him in standard leagues too. He's starting to see more carries. He's getting significant touches. I think right now he's the only one that they trust, and I would sit Kelly at least until he picks it up. As far as wideout goes, I would start Richardson and Lockett, the wide receivers for Seattle. Now, right now you look at Richardson, Lockett, and Baldwin. There's 3 wideouts, and all 3 of those guys are guys that you're probably going to start. Can that offense maintain 3 wideouts? And I think that they can. Once again, they have no running game. And so you look at last week, Richardson and Lockett had huge games. So I would start Richardson, I would start Lockett. Now, I would start Baldwin, but I would say this. Baldwin's the best of the 3 wideouts, but this week he faces Norman, who's been shutting down number 1 in wideout. So you could start Baldwin, but you need to see him as kind of a wide receiver 3 at this point. I said all wide receivers for the Redskins. Now, last week, Jameson Crowder came alive. He produced in a way that a lot of people thought going into this year he could produce. A lot of people saw him as a 1,000-yard wide receiver in his 3rd year. I was one of those guys that thought he was going to have a breakout year, but for whatever reason, the first 6 or 7 games, he just struggled. But he had a huge game last week. The problem with it is he's going to see Sherman a lot, and for me, that's a concern, so I wouldn't start him. I would sit Pryor. I would sit Doxson, Grant, those other wide receivers. They're all right, but once again, Seattle's good against the pass. None of them are trustworthy. As far as tight ends go, it sounds like Reed is going to be sitting out the game, and so that makes Vernon Davis a must-start this week. watch the injury report on Friday just to clarify that once again, if Reed starts, sit Davis. If Reed plays, you need to play Reed. He's too good to leave on your bench. And you start Graham. I would start Walsh at kicker, and I would sit Rose. I would start Seattle's defense, and I would sit Washington. Once again, start Seattle, sit Washington's defense. Then we look at the Chiefs and the Cowboys. You got to start Alex Smith once again. He was always known as a game manager, can control the clock, but he's having a really good year. I think he's got 16 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions, so you need to start him. Now start Dak Prescott. Kansas City gives up the 8th most points to quarterbacks, and it looks like Ezekiel Elliott is going to miss the next 6 games with a suspension, and that adds huge value to Dak Prescott, who's been a good quarterback. As far as running backs go, obviously you start Elliott if he plays, but right now sounds like he's trying to file an appeal, but all indications are he's not going to be able to appeal that, and he's going to have to sit for 6 games. So who do you start for Dallas there? Well, even before the year started, we said that the guy that looked towards was Alfred Morris. We felt like he's a north-south runner. He fits that offensive line style really well. And then we thought that McFadden would be their third down back, their change of pace back, guys that are doing passing downs. And everything that we've heard since then would seem to indicate that the guy that you need to pick up and start if Ezekiel Elliott is out is Alfred Morris. He could be a huge boost for you during 6 games if he's out there. You got to start Hunt, obviously, for Kansas City. As far as wideouts go, start Antonio Bryant and Tyreek Hill. And all other wideouts, I would sit on those teams. There's some talent there. They may have big days, but between all of them, they spread the ball around so much in targets. It's really unpredictable. I wouldn't trust any of those guys. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Witten. He's another guy that's going to get a huge bump from Ezekiel Elliott missing time. And then you look at Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is a guy that you got to start. Even though Dallas actually is pretty tough against tight ends, he's just too far talented to sit. So you're going to sit him. He'd be a fool not to start him. I would start both kickers. Butker's been huge, and Nugent has been decent. I would start, actually in this, I wouldn't start either defense. I would say both Dallas and Kansas City in this game. The Dolphins and the Raiders. Well, I would start Derek Carr. I think he's going to rebound from last week. He struggled a little bit. And now you look at Jay Cutler. Now he's back after Moore had failed. He's got cracked ribs. Now if you look at Jay Cutler this year, he's been kind of confused. He had 3 decent games. He had 3 really bad games. Now Oakland gives up the 14th most points to quarterbacks. It's kind of a scary pick, Jay Cutler. Now here's the positive thing that he has going for him. He gets Parker back, and J.I.J. is gone. And so at this point, if you look at the running back, they're going to have Damian Williams, who right now his yards per carry this year are 2.7. So he's getting Parker back. I suspect they're going to struggle to run the ball, which means they're going to have to throw it. So you could start him, but start him with your fingers crossed. As far as running backs go, you got Marshawn Lynch. And at this point, he's basically a plow. He's going to get 12 to 15 carries between the tackles, but his yards per carry at 3.7. He is not spectacular. You'll get the goal line carries, but he's not very involved in the passing game at all. He's a very low-end running back, 2 or 3. As far as Washington and Richard go, the 2 other running backs for Oakland, I actually like both of those guys. I think they offer a lot. And in fact, I think that Oakland's offense is better with them in there. But they're so similar to one another. In fact, they had the exact same measurement in terms of their height, their weight, and their skill set is very similar, which means they spread the ball around between the 2 of them, their targets and carries, and they make each other less valuable. So I would stay away from both of those. Miami sounds like they're going to go with Damian Williams as the running back. His career yards per carry at 3.3, and this year's 2.7. I'm not really sure what Miami's thinking there, giving up J.I.J. I don't know. I would stay away from Damian. If you're really, really desperate, you could pick him up. I hope you're not that desperate. As far as wideouts go, I'd start Parker and Landry, and I'd start Crabtree and Cooper, but I would also say they have lower ceilings this week. And so all those guys you need to start, but don't expect them to have huge games, but they should have decent games. As far as tight ends go, Jared Cook. Miami gives up the 9th most points to tight ends, and he's seen increased involvement in the offense the last few weeks. So Cook is a guy that you could start. I would sit Thomas. Neither kickers are great plays in this game. I would sit them both. As far as defenses go, I would sit Oakland and Miami in this. And let's go to the final game here. Packers and the Lions. Start Matthew Stafford. Now, Hundley, Detroit is good against the pass. Now, at some point, I think he's going to be a decent quarterback play in the right matchup simply because he has so many talented weapons around him. You look at Nelson and you look at Adams and some other guys. And so I wouldn't start him this week. Down the road, you might be able to get the right start, but Detroit is good against the pass, so I would sit him. Aaron Jones is a must-start at running back. He's taken over. He's the lead back there. He's got all the skills. They're going to give him the ball a lot, take pressure off their guy. He's huge. You could start starting Ty Montgomery, but in a PPR league only. Even before the year started, we went out publicly and we said before the season started that we didn't feel Ty Montgomery's a long-term answer, and it's played out exactly that way. He's a player that's almost a gadget player. He can run the ball, he can catch the ball in the backfield very well. Obviously, he's a converted wideout, but he's just not a pure running back. Start Marvin Jones and Golden Tate. Marvin Jones has had a really kind of a He's resurrected his season last 2 weeks. He's been huge. Golden Tate is solid, especially in PPR leagues. I would start Jordy Nelson and Adams, but remember, Aaron Rodgers is not the quarterback, so you need to really, really lower your expectations for those guys. I would sit Bennett and Eric Ebron. Start Prater, sit Crosby. I would start Detroit's defense, and I would sit Green Bay's defense. So that's the information I have up to this point. Obviously, between Tuesday and Friday, a lot changes, so we'll update things. If you have any questions, go ahead and message us at the bottom. I'd love to answer them for you. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to the video. Subscribe, get it out there to others. We're going to continue improving our products. We're going to continue improving our website, our interaction. We got some contests we're going to run for you guys. Thanks for joining me at the Fantasy Football Profits. God bless.